Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. We dive into these often complex ancient sources, and we pull out those key nuggets of wisdom that, really make you well-informed, often in ways you might not expect. Today, we're starting an extraordinary journey, really, into the life and the profound teachings of a truly pivotal historical figure, Imam Al-Ghazālī, and the rich traditions he helped, define and revive.
And what makes this particular deep dive so interesting is our source material. We're using direct excerpts from Ihya Ulumiddin Ghazālī, The Revival of Religious Learnings.
Right.
And it isn't just a book. It's this monumental collection that distills centuries, really, of deep spiritual, legal, and philosophical thought.
Wow.
As we unpack its insights, I think you'll discover some surprising connections between this ancient wisdom and, many of the modern challenges we face. Finding true knowledge, finding meaning in our lives today.
Absolutely. Our mission is to unpack the intricate details of this material, help you distinguish between, say, the outer forms and the inner meanings, and ultimately discover what it truly means to be well-informed, but in a spiritual sense. So, to begin our exploration, let's look at Imam Al-Ghazālī's own journey. Starting with his early life, the intellectual environment that shaped him. He began as a follower of Imam Shafi'i, who was himself a revered, pivotal figure in Islamic law, but he quickly found himself just immersed in the vibrant, sometimes pretty turbulent intellectual melting pot of Baghdad. Yeah,
Baghdad back then was just an incredible hub of ideas. Our sources describe it as this crucible where just so many diverse schools of thought coexisted. You had Shia, Sunnis, even groups like the Zindiks, Magians, Christians, Jews, various philosophical schools, theological schools.
Wow, quite a mix.
Oh, definitely. They engaged in what the sources call these mutual wars of argumentations and debates. And this intense intellectual environment, it profoundly affected Al-Ghazālī. It led him, quite dramatically actually, to question his own inherited beliefs. And as the source puts it, it compelled him to search for truth with a free mind.
That sounds like a powerful intellectual awakening, a journey from certainty to real questioning. And this intense search for truth, it ultimately led him down the path of Sufism.
Right.
Which, as our sources emphasize, kind of shifted his focus away from just theoretical belief towards a deeper emphasis on practical actions, inner purification.
Exactly.
This shift was so profound that in 488 AH, which is roughly 1095 CE, he took this extraordinary step. He suddenly left his, quote, lucrative post in Baghdad and adopted Sufi dress. Just imagine that, a complete transformation.
It really was a radical departure for such a prominent scholar. But, despite this dramatic personal change, his literary output remained just astonishing. He compiled nearly 400 books across incredibly diverse fields.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking theology, jurisprudence, logic, philosophy, including his famous autobiography, Munqidh min ad-Dalāl, often called Deliverance from Error.
Oh, yeah.
He also wrote extensively on scholastic theology, spiritual and moral subjects like the Ihya Ulumiddin we're looking at, and Kimya Sada. Tragically, his huge 40-volume Quranic commentary is now lost.
Oh, what a loss.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting many of his books were preserved in Europe, even while some were, unfortunately, not accepted by Muslims at the time, or were even burned.
It's truly hard to fathom that sheer volume of work. And among those hundreds, Ihya Ulumiddin, The Revival of Religious Learnings, is consistently described as his masterpiece. The contemporary testimonials are just incredible.
Right.
Abul Ghaffar Farsi, a scholar of his time, said, a book like Ihya was never compiled before. And Imam Nodi, another highly respected scholar, went as far as saying Ihya is near the Qur'an. I mean, that's incredibly high praise.
The reverence for Ihya really, it ran deep. It shows just how impactful it was. Sheikh Abu Muhammad famously claimed that if all the lights of knowledge were somehow extinguished, they could be revived just from Ihya.
Wow.
We even have accounts of saints, like Sheikh Abdullah Idris, committing the entire book to memory. Or Sheikh Ali, who apparently read it 25 times, cover to cover, celebrating each completion with a feast for students and the poor.
That paints such a vivid picture of its spiritual significance. And here's where it gets really interesting, showing just how deeply this book became ingrained in the spiritual consciousness of the time.
Yeah.
The source recounts this story of Qutb Shaji, a scholar who initially disregarded the book. But then in a vision, Imam Al-Ghazālī himself appeared to him, in the presence of the Holy Prophet, no less, and inflicted lashes on his back as a consequence of his disrespect for Ihya.
You're kidding. Lashes.
Yeah. The story even claims he showed the physical marks as proof afterwards. I mean, that's a powerful statement about the perceived spiritual authority of Al-Ghazali and his writings.
That is fascinating, and it really underlines the deep reverence people had. But, beyond the sheer volume and the veneration, he also had some remarkably strong opinions about the nature of knowledge itself, right? How did he challenge the prevailing intellectual trends of his day?
He certainly did. His critique was, well, pretty sharp. He argued that knowledge without a connection to God is, quote, fit to be entirely rejected.
Right.
He observed that many of the so-called learned men of his time, focused mainly on worldly pursuits, were neglecting true spiritual insight. They, he said, kind of duped people into believing that true science was confined to just 3 areas.
Only 3. Which ones?
Jurisprudence, so laws for administration and judges. Munazara, which were debates aimed simply at, winning against adversaries.
Just arguing to win.
Exactly. And scholastic theology, used mainly to influence public opinion. He said they saw no other sciences as valid.
So, if I'm getting this right, Al-Ghazali wasn't saying these subjects were bad in themselves necessarily, but that limiting knowledge only to them, especially if it was disconnected from a higher purpose, that was spiritually problematic.
Precisely. It's like building a beautiful structure but forgetting the foundation.
Yeah, exactly. He saw these as potentially valuable tools, but critically flawed if they became an end in themselves, disconnecting people from that deeper, higher purpose. This was in stark contrast to how he viewed the truly learned, those he called guides to these paths and heirs of the prophets.
Right.
Al-Ghazali clarified that there are basically 2 fundamental kinds of knowledge people need. First is practical religion, which includes spiritual matters. He then broke these down into categories of compulsory duty. Farz Ain, for example.
Okay, what's that?
That's a compulsory individual duty for every Muslim. It includes essential beliefs like the words of attestation and other duties as they become binding, like understanding destructive evils, things like sordid miserliness, vehement passion, and self-conceit that corrupt the soul.
Got it. And the second kind?
Then there's Farz Kifaya. This is more of a collective obligation, binding on the community as a whole. This covers sciences needed for worldly progress, medicine, maths, agriculture, administration, industry, weaving, things like that.
Okay.
The idea is, if at least one person in a locality learns it and fulfills that need, then the whole community is sort of absolved of the direct obligation.
That creates a very clear hierarchy of learning. It really drives home Al-Ghazali's point when he advises, don't engage your life to the learning of only one branch of education, as life is short, but the learnings are many.
Mm-hmm.
He explicitly states the priority should be the science of heart, that inner purification from sins before you should fully engage in Farz Kifaya. It really makes you wonder, in our modern pursuit of specialization, are we sometimes neglecting that science of the heart?
That's such a crucial question today. And speaking of things that corrupt the heart, his condemnation of disputation or, debate just for the sake of argument, it's particularly strong.
Really? How so?
He saw it as a source of immense spiritual harm, leading to rancor, backbiting, which God likens to eating carrion. Just think about that image. Yeah. Declaration of self-purity, spying, hypocrisy, and ultimately turning away from the truth. He even cites the prophet's promise of a garden in paradise for giving up disputation on unlawful things, and a house in the highest paradise for giving up disputation even on truth if it's just for argument's sake.
Wow. That's a powerful warning against that argumentative spirit that can just poison communities, whether it was ancient Baghdad or, social media today.
Exactly.
That's a remarkable insight, especially given how much time we spend in debates and arguments now. Mm-hmm. So what does this all mean for how we understand core concepts? Al-Ghazali observed that key terms like fiqh, tawhid, and tazkir had their original profound meanings altered over time, becoming, as he put it, blameworthy. Mm-hmm. How did these fundamental terms get so distorted?
That's a great question, because this isn't just about ancient religious terms, right? It's a powerful lesson in how the essence of any vital concept can decay. Let's break them down. First, fiqh, or religious learning.
Okay.
Originally, this term meant science of the path of the hereafter. It encompassed knowledge of the soul's beneficial or harmful matters. the deeper meanings of the Qur'an, and the complete domination of God-fear over the heart.
So much deeper than just law.
Much deeper. The Prophet himself said that a perfect faqih is one who does not deprive the people of the mercy of God, does not give hope of freedom from punishment, nor makes them lose hope of his mercy, nor discards the Qur'an in favor of something else. But Al-Ghazali noted its modern meaning in his time had become tragically confined to just unusual legal cases and excessive debates.
Wow, that's a massive shift. What about Tawheed? That's a central concept.
Tawheed, the unity of God. Originally, it signified the belief that all things come from God, totally ruling out any intermediary causes. This profound understanding led to complete God reliance, avoiding complaints to people, not getting angry at them, being satisfied with God's decree.
Complete reliance.
Total reliance. There's a powerful story about Abu Bakr, a close companion of the Prophet. When he was ill, people suggested calling a physician. He just replied, "The physician himself has given me this disease."
Wow.
He embodied that absolute reliance. But in Al-Ghazali's time, the meaning of Tawheed had been reduced to scholastic theology and mere argumentation methods. He beautifully described this as taking the husk and giving up the pith.
Husk versus pith.
The outer verbal confession versus the inner confirmation, that deep entrustment of all affairs to God.
That analogy is incredibly insightful. It's not just about ancient terms. It's a reminder that in any aspect of life, work, relationships, spiritual practice, it's so easy to get caught up in the external forms, the husk, while losing sight of the essential inner meaning, the pith. Makes you think, how many of us are living in the husk of our own lives?
It really does.
And finally, tazkir.
Tazkir, which now often just implies simple storytelling. Al-Ghazali considered this an innovation because it deviated so much from its original meaning. The true assembly of zikr, or remembrance of God, involved deep reflection on the hereafter, contemplating death, understanding the defects of your own soul, recognizing the machinations of the devil.
Much more intense.
Much more. The Prophet highlighted its immense value, saying, "To be present at the assembly of zikr is better than 1,000 rakats of prayers, visiting 1,000 sick men and attending 1,000 funerals." It's a callback to a deeper, more introspective engagement, something that fosters real spiritual transformation.
A call back to deeper engagement. And speaking of depth, let's look at intellect, aql. We often think of it as just cleverness, raw brain power, but Al-Ghazali, he reveals a much richer concept.
Absolutely. Al-Ghazali identified 4 distinct meanings of intellect, or aql, that sort of build on each other. The first is a natural attribute, distinguishing humans from animals, a kind of light which falls into the heart, helping it grasp theoretical sciences. It's that fundamental human capacity to understand.
Okay, basic capacity.
Second is instinctive knowledge, like knowing 2 is greater than 1, those basic undeniable truths we just know.
Right.
The third meaning describes knowledge acquired through experience and observation. When someone is schooled by time, as he puts it, and thus called a person of intellect, they've learned from life's lessons.
Experiential wisdom.
Exactly. And the fourth, and perhaps the most profound, is the power to foresee the consequences of actions. This enables you to control present pleasures for an ultimate greater good. It's self-control, long-term vision.
That's a powerful redefinition. So the first 2 are sort of innate, and the latter 2 are acquired wisdom. This really challenges our modern obsession with just the first 2 kinds, raw brain power and basic facts. Al-Ghazali seems to be saying true wisdom is about how you live that knowledge, especially when it comes to long-term consequences and self-control. It makes you wonder, are we prioritizing the right kind of smarts today?
It's a great question. And he ultimately concludes that the wise man is God-fearing, even if they are abject and despised in the world, which, again, just flips our conventional understanding of success completely on its head.
This deep dive into Ihya Ulumiddin, it provides not just these abstract concepts, but also really specific guidance on practical religious duties, ethical conduct, highlighting how internal states are just as important as the external actions. It's about embodying these ideas.
Exactly. The text emphasizes core pillars of faith, starting with the fundamental knowledge of God's existence, evidenced by his creation, the heavens, the earth, everything around us.
Right, the signs.
It details his nature without form, space, or body. His attributes almighty, all-knowing, speech without words, his will governing all actions. It also includes belief in the punishment of the grave, the balance, the bridge, paradise, and hell as already created realities.
Okay.
And crucially, the sources make it clear that knowledge of God and obedience to his commands are compulsory because of Sharia, the divine law, not just because human reason figures it out.
So it's fundamentally about submission to divine decree. Let's delve into some of the daily practices detailed in the source then. Starting with purity and prayer. What's the spiritual significance there, beyond just the physical acts?
Well, for purity, the text highlights the importance of the toothstick, the miswak, before every prayer and ablution, which is the ritual washing.
Right.
And while it details the physical steps of ablution, washing specific limbs and so on, the real emphasis is on the internal state and the virtues tied to it. Sins are said to literally fall from your body parts as they're washed. And the gates of paradise open for you. It's seen as a profound spiritual cleansing, not just physical.
So much more than just washing up.
Definitely. And when it comes to prayer, or salat, the internal conditions are paramount. Things like humility of mind, presence of mind, avoiding heedlessness. The Prophet is quoted saying, "If a man prays 2 rakats, units of prayer, without any thought of the world therein, his past sins are forgiven."
Incredible. It shows how that inner intention just elevates the whole outward action.
Precisely.
And what about the communal prayers, like Jummah, the Friday congregational prayer?
Jummah prayer is presented as a particularly holy day with immense virtues. The sources emphasize running towards remembrance, preparing for it even from Thursday. There's even talk of searching for an elusive, auspicious moment on Friday when prayers are said to be definitely answered.
Interesting. And almsgiving, zakat, and charity.
For almsgiving, the teaching is quite specific. The best charity is given when you yourself are healthy and maybe a bit reluctant to spend, prioritizing your own family first.
Okay, practical.
Very. And secret charity is highly virtuous, described as 70 times more rewarding than charity done openly. It apparently destroys 70 evils.
70 times.
Yeah. The sources share these poignant anecdotes that really bring it to life, like Hazrat Omar, a revered companion, praying for the rich specifically so they could benefit the needy. And Ibn Masud, another scholar, telling a story of a man who worshipped for 70 years, but his sins were forgiven because of a single piece of bread he gave to a poor man out of genuine compassion.
It's about the spirit of the giving then, not just the amount or the act itself.
Exactly. It's the sincerity and the state of the heart behind it.
Fasting, too, seems to go way beyond just not eating or drinking.
Oh, absolutely. Beyond the physical abstinence, true fasting involves restraining your eyesight from what is evil and your tongue from useless talk, false speaking, backbiting, slander.
So guarding the senses in speech.
Completely. Backbiting, for instance, is explicitly said to spoil your fast. It just underscores that the internal discipline is the real core of it. The sources even warn that fasting with lawful food, but then breaking your fast with unlawful food is like destroying a town just to construct one building. It completely defeats the spiritual purpose.
That's a powerful analogy. And then there's the pilgrimage, Hajj. What's the deeper meaning there?
Well, its immense excellence is highlighted. Promises of forgiveness, pilgrims being considered guests of God. But the 10 secret things of Hajj mentioned in the sources go far beyond the physical journey and rituals.
Secret things? Like what?
Well, for example, acts like throwing stones at Mina or running between Safa and Marwa. The sources explain these are not meant to be understood solely by our intellect. They're presented as acts of blind obedience.
Blind obedience. That sounds, challenging to a modern mindset. Can you unpack that? Why is that considered the highest order of slavery, as the text puts it?
That's a perfect point. It does sound challenging. But Al-Ghazali's insight here is really profound. Think of it maybe like a child who trusts their parent completely, even if they don't understand every single instruction, because they know deep down the parent has their best interest at heart.
Okay.
Or maybe a loyal soldier who follows orders they don't fully comprehend because they trust the commander and the bigger mission. For Al-Ghazali, these acts of blind obedience in Hajj, where your intellect might not grasp the immediate why, are meant to perfect your servitude to God.
So it's about absolute trust and surrender.
Exactly. It's cultivating a state where your will completely aligns with the divine will, even when the reason isn't obvious. It purifies the ego, demonstrates complete devotion, and the purpose of the animal sacrifice during Hajj is also clarified, to purify from the guilt of miserliness and to adorn it for God with honor.
That analogy of the child or the soldier really helps clarify the depth there. It's about surrendering the ego, the intellect, for that higher purpose. The source also offers these profound examples from other great imams, showing how these principles were actually lived out.
Yes, we learn about Imam Shafi'i, the giant of Islamic law. He divided his night into 3 parts: study, prayer, sleep. Recited the entire Qur'an 60 times just in Ramadan. Incredible, isn't it? His generosity and profound God-fear were such that he would apparently fall into a swoon upon hearing certain Quranic verses. Then there's Imam Abu Hanifa, another renowned jurist, described as greatly God-fearing, spending long periods in silence and meditation. He even famously refused the powerful post of Chief Justice because of his profound truthfulness. He basically said, if I tell the truth as judge, people won't like it, and if I lie, I'm unfit for the post.
What integrity.
Exactly. And Imam Malik, known for his deep veneration for the city of Medina, preferring it over the whole world, and his courage in telling the Caliph Harun Rashid, the powerful ruler, that knowledge is something you shall learn and not something you should receive, basically telling the Caliph to come to him, not the other way around.
Wow. These figures really exemplify that deep piety and unwavering integrity Al-Ghazali was talking about.
They really do.
Let's turn our attention now to the Qur'an itself and the practice of remembering God's zikr. These seem often undervalued today, maybe, but they're presented here as absolute cornerstones of spiritual success.
Definitely. The Qur'an is described in the most exalted terms. The dearest thing of God, the best intercessor, the best divine service. Reciting it is said to remove rust from the heart. It's a cure and a blessing for the believer.
Beautiful descriptions.
And it's noted that the angels themselves rejoiced when it was revealed. The prophet even stated that God hears Qur'an recitation more attentively than the master of a singing girl. Just think about that level of attention from the divine.
That's quite an image.
And when it comes to actually reading the Qur'an, the rules emphasize not just reciting words, but truly internalizing them. You should give speciality to every call of the Qur'an.
What does that mean exactly?
It means if you hear commands or prohibitions in the text, you should think, okay, this command has been given to me. This prohibition has been directed against me. Stories aren't just historical information. They are direct lessons for you, the reader, right now.
That completely changes how you'd approach reading it. It makes it intensely personal, not just an ancient text, but a living dialogue.
Exactly.
And the power of zikr, the remembrance of God.
Constant remembrance of God, especially in the morning and evening, is described as being better fruitful than charity of your gold and silver, and you're striking with sword the necks of the enemies of God.
Better than charity and fighting for God.
That's what the source says. It's so powerful it leads to God remembering his servant in turn, creating this profound mutual spiritual connection. And the assembly of zikr, gathering for remembrance, is depicted as a place where angels literally surround those present. Mercy encompasses them, their sins are forgiven, and virtues are given instead. It's described as better than 2,000 assemblies of sin.
Incredible.
It's even said that the devil and the allure of the world actually separate themselves from people who are in zikr assemblies.
That's powerful protection. And the Kalima Shahadat, there is no deity but God.
Its immense weight is conveyed by this saying. If it is weighed in a scale and the 7 heavens and 7 earths are placed in another scale, the scale of there is no deity but God will be heavier.
Heavier than the heavens and the earth.
Yeah. It's said to destroy sins, offer no loneliness in their grave, and ultimately open the doors of paradise. Just that core statement of faith.
And finally, the practice of night vigil, tahajjud.
The night vigil, praying late at night or early morning, is highly recommended for additional worship and achieving an additional rank in God's sight. It's believed to cure diseases, prevent faults, and bring one near God. The prophet beautifully said, "As the dwellers of the earth see the brightness of the stars, so the inmates of heaven see the light of your house," referring to the light emanating from the homes of those who perform these deep, personal night prayers.
What a beautiful image. So we've journeyed through this intricate tapestry of wisdom from Imam Al-Ghazali and these other great figures. It reveals a path to knowledge and piety that really transcends just academic study or, outward ritual. It's about a complete transformation of the inner self.
Exactly. We've seen how internal intention, the spiritual state, is absolutely paramount, even in seemingly mundane actions like ablution, or in the highest acts of worship like Hajj, where that blind obedience becomes the ultimate expression of trust and servitude, purifying the ego.
This deep dive really reminds us that true understanding isn't just about what we know, but how that knowledge transforms our inner selves and connects us to the divine. It's really about moving from that husk to the pith, as Al-Ghazālī put it.
And it prompts us to consider, doesn't it, in our age of just constant information overload, endless debate, where so many external forms demand our attention, how can we truly embrace that science of the heart to achieve genuine clarity and wisdom in our own lives? What stands out to you from this deep dive?